Hey guys, this is Chad Judice, and you're listening to The Art of Suffering. Our mess becomes God's message. In the book of Genesis, we're introduced to Jacob, the son of Isaac and brother of Esau, who is a central character in the story of salvation history because his 12 sons go on to become the 12 tribes of Israel. Jacob, fleeing a conflict with his uncle Laban and approaching his blood brother Esau for the first time after stealing his birthright and a blessing from their father years earlier, encounters a man whom he wrestles with in the wilderness all night until the break of dawn. When the man wrestling with Jacob realized he would not prevail, he struck Jacob's hip and dislocated it. The man said to Jacob, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." And Jacob replied, "I will not release you till you grant me a blessing." In this epic struggle between the human and the divine, the man wrestling with Jacob was God, and he bestowed upon Jacob a new name, Israel. Throughout salvation history, it's evident no one encounters God and walks away the same person. The change in their name signifies something deeper, an internal surrender from being the author of their own story and becoming a supporting character in God's. And that's true today as well. It's only when we wrestle with God through our walk with the cross that our mission as intentional disciples of Jesus Christ become crystal clear. This current generation of teens has been raised following the horrific events of September 11th, 2001. They have lived in a subconscious state of anxiety, fear, isolation, and mistrust. The culture they inhabit is one of instant gratification and access to endless information through online media. They receive and process information and the gospel in a much different way than other generations who came before them. Sociological studies from a recent Gallup poll show that young people in this demographic today collectively identify as lonely, isolated, and very distrustful of almost all organized institutions. And the ability of those institutions and individuals within them who are attempting to gain and hold the trust of young people is more challenging than ever before. Just 50 years ago, 65% of young adults trusted institutions of organized religion. Today, the percentage of young people who trust an institution like the Catholic Church is only about 36%. 66% of individuals between the age of 13 to 25 say that they have 3 or fewer meaningful human interactions and conversations with others each day. Many of them feel as though no one cares or is ever listening to them. However, they have all said the intervention and impact of one trusted adult in their life can be transformative and serve as a deterrent to their sense of isolation and in discovering hope and meaning for their life. Engaging young people in genuine relationships is a challenge many people today are not willing to dedicate their life to doing. I'm here with a person today who wrestled with God in the desert of his life. He overcame bullying and feelings of inadequacy in childhood and as an adult in order to help young people today do the same thing. He is a former seminarian who discerned he wasn't called to the Catholic priesthood and eventually got married. He's in the trenches of this ongoing battle and has made himself available in order to be that one significant adult in the lives of countless young people for the past decade. His story is one that many of you will relate to, and his response to God's call will inspire others to give their own yes to God, even when it's not what they originally envisioned for their life. Kyle Melancon is a dynamic speaker, youth minister, and an evangelist. He worked as and served as both the youth coordinator and campus minister for the students and participants in the catechetical programs of Sacred Heart of Jesus Catholic School and Church Parish in the Diocese of Biloxi, Mississippi. Eventually, he returned home to Lafayette and became the coordinator of youth and adult disciple formation at Holy Cross Catholic Church. His desire has always been to move youth and young adults to the next threshold of discipleship by building trust and seeking to equip future Catholics with not only what, but who they need to be instruments so God can help bring other people to themselves. Kyle, it's great to have you
Yeah, I'm very excited to be with you.
And I appreciate the ministry you do, and I appreciate our friendship. It's really grown a lot, and I met you before I ended up becoming the director of the Office of Catechetics, and we've had a chance to journey. And I just want to say, before we start our conversation, you've expressed to me many times in many ways how much my friendship means to you, and I want you to know that your friendship means as much to me. Oftentimes, I think sometimes when you're doing ministry, everybody has their own style, their own approach to doing things. And oftentimes we kind of get put under a spotlight and you have everybody looking at you. And oftentimes I find that people will project onto other people the things they most dislike about themselves that they see in that other person. And I think it has to do with being insecure. And what I really picked up on you from the beginning was that you never did that. And you were always open to just accept me for who I was and for where I was coming from and just giving me an ear. And honestly, that's anybody who's got a story to share. That's all they really want. And if you know their story, it kind of gives a point of reference for how they do ministry. And I just want to say I appreciate that from you. So thank you for your friendship, and thank you for sharing part of your life with the audience today.
Absolutely.
And you have an interesting story. As I was preparing the questionnaire, and we were kind of talking before the interview, and I've heard you on another podcast share a version of your story. And I think you've shared this with me too in many conversations we've had, that you battled Tourette Syndrome. And I found this online at the mayoclinic.com about Tourette Syndrome. It says that the syndrome and the symptoms of it typically show up between the ages of 2 and 15, and with the average being around 6 years of age when they kind of manifest themselves. It says that males are about 3 to 4 times more likely than females to develop Tourette Syndrome. And although there's no medical cure for Tourette Syndrome, there are treatments that are available. What's unique about your story is that you have been cured from Tourette Syndrome. And I know that it had something to do with a lot of prayer and people in your life, and a little bit to do with, if I'm not mistaken, St. Padre Pio. So could you take a few minutes and kind of walk the audience through that story and that journey? Because I just found when I heard it on the other podcast you were on, it was amazing.
So I was diagnosed with Tourette's around kindergarten. I had an incredible kindergarten teacher who I still have relationships with to this day. They were someone who understood that I was unique and different than the rest of the class. And so I was able to, be diagnosed with Tourette's through that teacher's help of bringing me to my parents' attention that I needed to go get a specialist in New Orleans to kind of evaluate and do the neurological studies that basically discover the tics and the Tourette syndrome. And so they would diagnose me with that disease. And so majority of my early childhood development was kind of having to deal with bullying of my different tics. Like most of them were like grunting. I would twitch, kind of move compulsively, and of course not being able to control any of that. And so I was picked on and bullied, and it really was a challenging developmental time for me. My parents were always my rocks. They nonstop prayed for me, and so was my grandfather. My grandfather has really been kind of like a spiritual guru in my family, has always prayed for us and always sought to basically make sure that we were living a life that was filled with the gospel. And he had a relationship to Padre Pio. And my grandfather had this prayer room, and inside the prayer room was an image of Padre Pio, and tucked away underneath that image was a picture of me as a child, as a young boy. And for years, my grandfather prayed through the intercession of Padre Pio that my Tourette syndrome would be cured and removed. So I was very thankful because, and another story, I didn't know this until later. And as I read your book, Waiting for Eli, was kind of funny because you mentioned a lot about Father Manning. And I know that when I was young and when I first had gotten diagnosed with Tourette's, my parents actually took me to see Father Manning, and he prayed over me when I was a little child. So I know that through the help of Padre Pio and also the prayers of Father Manning, I know that God obviously had a purpose and a plan to heal me. So I thought I'd share that with you because I think it's so cool that it was in your story. So I remembered later I would go and visit a priest friend of mine in Picayune, Mississippi. And while I was there, this priest had the ability to kind of read souls. He would pray, lay hands, and like he would tell things that were going on in our lives and in our journey. And one of the things that he had mentioned to me was that I had a relationship to Padre Pio. And at the time when I was getting prayed over, I didn't know that my grandfather had been praying countless hours to Padre Pio's intercession for me to be healed. So it would be later that week that I'd be sitting with my grandfather, and I shared the story of this priest in Picayune, Mississippi, and how he prayed over me and said that Padre Pio has been with me since my childhood. And in that moment, my grandfather said, I have something to show you. And he brought me into his bedroom and said, Kyle, since you were diagnosed with Tourette syndrome, I have been praying that you would be healed of this. And so it wasn't until my high school years, around the 9th grade, that God would actually heal all of the symptoms of Tourette syndrome in my life.
That's amazing. And just to clarify for the audience, if they're not familiar with Father Manny, he like this. He must be he's kind of like this priest you're mentioning in Picayune, Mississippi, because I'm pretty sure he's got a lot of spiritual gifts. One of them is the charism of healing, and he operates out of the Diocese of Lafayette, and he's a parish priest. But he also has a charismatic healing ministry, and he had a big impact on my journey as well. And I'm assuming we have a few priests in our diocese, I've heard through the grapevine, can also read souls, and that's a pretty amazing gift that God will give to a prelate. And in the confessional, it really helps, because when you go in there, you want to be able to clean off your soul, right? You want to give out everything that's on your soul, so you can walk away completely healed and in union with God. And I have something for you. I never got a chance to give it to you, but I've been holding on to it since I heard that story on the original podcast. I've got a couple things from St. Padre Pio that I want to give to you, because I figured after hearing that story, you should probably have them instead of me. So next time we hang out, I'm going to hand them to you, man. I'm quoting you here from the conversation we had through emails before we decided to do the show. It says, you had a great deal of hardships being someone who had this stigma that kids around me didn't really understand. And I would receive a great deal of bullying and unrest. You kind of talked about that. And you had a label placed on you that you thought would be crippling, and was tried the majority of your life to seek attention because of the deficit that it had created in your mind. Ultimately, the deficit would only be filled by a God of love. I no longer have Tourette's. You just said that because of a miracle, which you just explained. But without the time I spent with the disease, I would not be the person I am today. And this kind of flows into the whole purpose I do this podcast, is that something that seems tragic to somebody and unfortunate can actually turn into a greater good, which is kind of one of the answers philosophically to why God allows suffering. So how has that made you a better person today?
So, because the story has multiple layers, after I was healed of the Tourette syndrome, instead of turning to God, because at the time I didn't realize that it was God that healed me of this suffering, that it was God's doing that allowed me to no longer have this stigma of Tourette syndrome. And in that moment, instead of turning to God, I turned to the world. I wanted so badly to connect to people because of the lack of attention that I received by the bullying. I turned inward and I turned to selfish desires. And that's when I started going basically to turning to the world and trying so hard to connect to people. And it led to a sinful behavior. Eventually, from that, I would encounter a loving God who would transform my life. And it was basically through mission work. When I would encounter God, I would get in trouble with my parents because I snuck out of the house or did some crazy things. And basically, I saw my mother cry. And it was kind of like an Augustine moment for me. My mother was crying and praying, and at night I could hear her, Lord, change my son. Change my son. He's a good person. He has a good heart. That night, hearing my mother's cries, I ran out of my house. I was so devastated at the fact that I had been living a sinful life and turning my back on God, who was constantly trying to just show that he loved me. I ran to a catechist. This was before Safe Environment. We used to do catechism classes in the home. And I went to my catechist whose house was down the road from where I lived. And I remember going to this catechist and saying, I need help. I had been living a life of sin. I need God back in my life. And the catechist directed me to the chapel. It was at the chapel at St. Pius X Church in Lafayette, where I would see the Christ on the cross, suffering, dying for me. And it was in that moment that I recognized that he had done all of this for me. Though I was this person who was wrestling with God and trying to get through all of the struggles of this disease and just the insecurities that I had. It was in that moment that I recognized God loved me. And I wanted nothing more than to share that love with others. So around my senior year in high school, I joined a group of friends and we became door-to-door evangelists. We started knocking on random people's doors and inviting them to the church. And in those times, hanging out with these high schoolers and inviting people to Jesus, I met this woman who had been away from the church for about 8 years. And we get inside the door, Chad, and she locks us in. We were freaking out. And she was like this elderly woman. We're like, she can't kill us. I hope not, you know. But in that moment, we're sitting down together. We're just sharing each other's stories and journeys. And at the end of the conversation, we walked outside and she looked at me and said, "You saved my life today." And that really struck my heart in a deep, deep way, knowing that I had helped bring someone to Christ. And not too long after that conversation, she had passed away. It was that experience that solidified that I have a mission in life. Before something like death comes around into people's journeys, it is my mission to bring them to Jesus before they die, to make sure that they experience the salvific message of the gospel. And so that's kind of been, I guess, that experience for me, in knowing now that I'm given a plan and a mission. That was that was my hip socket punch, if you will, that basically crippled me to the point of I need to serve God again. And that's where the miracle God gave me by taking away the Tourette's had a reason. The years of bullying, the years of heartache and feeling insecure and struggling, all of that had a reason and a plan. And that plan was for me to know that I am a missionary disciple called to serve.
That's beautiful, man. And I'm assuming that this experience you had with this woman and this understanding, it's like God gave you a new name in that moment, right? So you finally figured out what your mission was. Is that part of the reason that experience, is that part of what drew you into the seminary? And can you maybe take a few minutes and talk about your journey through seminary, getting into it, getting out of it, and then what happened immediately after that kind of led you into being a youth minister?
Absolutely. So for me, seminary was an incredible journey. I remember at the time, Father Aaron Melancon was our vocation director. And to join the seminary, it's a process. It really is a long process. You have to go through rigorous psychological evaluations, background checks, all kind of stuff. There's a lot of paperwork involved. You have to meet with different priests. And because when a person is ordained to the priesthood, it's not just like anybody can become a priest and say, I want to be a priest. The church has to discern whether this person is truly called. And that's the role of seminary formation. The role of seminary formation is to really make sure that we're called. And so when I was in seminary, my grandfather was super influential, the one who had the same image of Padre Pio. And he was actually the one who would take me to the seminary. I remember writing this in my journal at the Institute for Priestly Formation. And for those of you who don't know what that is, in between the minor seminary years and our major seminary years, all of the seminarians take a summer assignment in Omaha, Nebraska at Creighton University, and they study at the Institute for Priestly Formation. And it's there that they spend an 8-day silent retreat, and we're trained in a very Ignatian spirituality journey, going inward, discovering who we are, and truly just growing in deepening our relationship with prayer. And I remember writing in my journal the influential experience I had with my grandfather in the car ride to St. Ben's. I remember traveling to Covington, Louisiana, and when we got to the bridge, The minute that you crossed that bridge into St. Benedict's, Louisiana, it was like leaving Earth and entering into almost this sanctuary of a promised land, if you will. And so in that time, my grandfather looked at me and said, Kyle, remember this: before your mother, before your father, and even before me, there is a heavenly Father and a heavenly Mother that seeks after you. And that is who you're called to serve always. Always. And I remember getting out the car, tears rolling down my eyes as I left my family, going up to a seminary room, which was no bigger than a closet almost. It was a cell, very small room with nothing more than a bed and a desk. And I remember sitting on my bed in that moment and saying, okay, God, I'm here. My ears are opening. I'm listening to your call. I'm listening to your will. And we did a great deal of rigorous studies at seminary. Seminary was not easy. You had to get up daily for prayer, morning and evening. You had mass every day. There was a great deal of time spent in doing homework and studying. It was the first time that I ever had to actually ask for help and get a study group. And it's pretty awesome that I have this relationship with two other seminarians that are now priests. One's a priest in the Diocese of Chicago and Atlanta, and another one is a priest in the Diocese of Lafayette. And these two guys, we had a relationship where it was almost like in my time there, we were the Peter, James, and John experience. We all said that we would pray together and experience the transfiguration together. And we would go up the mountain, and I was just like Peter. Hey, I just want to stay up here and not leave. I don't want to go back to the real world. But part of me was struggling with that inward desire to love, right? That to love specifically another person. I had that deep desire when I was younger to get married and have a family. And I could not, for the life of me, I wanted so badly to become a priest. But celibacy was something that God has to gift us with. It is a specific gift of the Holy Spirit. It's a specific charism that God gives certain people. And I begged God that would be my charism, and it just wasn't. And so slowly but surely, I would discern to leave. And that was a very difficult time when I left. Felt like I was letting everyone down. I felt like I was letting the diocese down. I felt like I was letting Father Aaron down, my parents, my grandfather. And when my grandfather would embrace me when I got home and said, son, I love you no matter what, that's whenever it was, again, another healing moment for me.
Well, I'm looking at one of the questions I asked you before we got together, and I'm looking at one of the answers you have here. Seminary was probably some of the best years of my life. It was around that time that I had a breakup in Hattiesburg that God revealed his love for me. I was so hurt that I visited a priest in Picayune, who you mentioned earlier, who read your soul in confession, and that experience transformed your life. So you left seminary, and then you moved to Mississippi, if I remember part of your story you shared with me before, and you went there. And did you follow somebody there? Was there a reason you went there? And if you followed somebody there, it might have been a female, I'm assuming, and maybe you thought you were going to marry that girl, but ironically, if I understand, I remember right, you didn't marry her. You married somebody else.
Right. That's a funny story. So when I left seminary, I needed to get my life in order. And I'm so thankful that the Bishop of Lafayette at the time allowed me to stay with a priest for about 3 months after leaving seminary. And that was to help me, A, financially get back on my feet, and B, it was also to kind of transition me back into the world. I was doing the youth ministry in this particular parish out in Franklin, Baldwin, Louisiana. And so during that time, this priest, Father Greg Cormier, spent time as my spiritual director. And then every evening we did evening prayer together. And I remember him praying with me and just kind of helping me heal through all of the different heartaches that I experienced, even through seminary, through the Tourette Syndrome, just all of the process of my life, really just kind of praying with me. And at the time, I was dating this girl in Hattiesburg. It was kind of funny because Father Cormier has a very funny sense of humor. He used to be like, Kyle, you cannot go from one frying pan of celibacy and seminary life into now dating. Like you can't move from one frying pan to the next. Like that's not smart. I didn't heed his advice because I was like a stubborn little kid who just wanted to get his way. Because again, I relate to Jacob in the desert. I am a wrestler. I do not want to do what I feel is sometimes what God wants me to do. I just want to do with me, right? So I wrestle a lot with these things. So Father was like, "Hey, don't do this." He warned me, and I didn't listen. And I would eventually move to Hattiesburg, Mississippi, for a girl I was dating at the time. And not even 2 weeks after I had moved there, she broke up with me. And it was a very devastating, like, again, checkpoint to the hip, wrestling with God. God always wins. In that moment, I was so devastated, and I kind of turned to the world again, just kind of struggling and trying to figure things out. And the priest that hired me at the time, he was actually a priest that was married before he became a priest and was divorced. He divorced his wife and got an annulment because he worked through the annulment process or whatever. And he remembered 3 a.m. in the morning. I'm in the chapel. I'm sitting there, and he comes, just puts his arm on me. He said, "She broke up with you, didn't she?" And I was like, "Yeah, Father." He's like, "Well, then that's when he shared his experience, his story." And he made a suggestion to go visit a basilica in Natchez, Mississippi. So that day, he let me off of work. He was like, "I want you to take a day off and go to this church in Natchez." And I remember driving out to Natchez to this beautiful basilica, the most gorgeous church I've ever seen. And there was an Irish priest there. this Irish priest, I'll never forget. I went to confession. I just prayed, asked for healing. And this little priest kind of slapped me on the face. And in a little Irish voice says, "You need to get over yourself." It just kind of just hit me one good one in the face. And I was like, "Okay, God, like, I'm going to start my journey fresh." And while I was there in Mississippi, I would eventually meet the love of my life. And that's my beautiful wife now, Elise.
Yeah, and I've since I've known you, you've been married and to her, and what's really unique, and I always thought it was unique, is that you're a youth minister in a Catholic parish, and she's a Christian, but she's not a Catholic. So one of the things I want you to kind of talk about today for just a few minutes, if you don't mind, is what's that like being married to a non-Catholic? I'm sure it's challenging with as passionate you are about your faith, and as much as you love her. How does that help you grow as a youth minister in your parish? And how does it help you do your job better in your parish?
That's a great question. So I will say that in a marriage, one thing that you learn a great deal of is patience, the willingness to recognize our faults. And my wife does her incredible job of keeping me humble. I've never had someone more supportive of what I do. My wife was like, "I want you to always be where God wants you to be. And if that's a youth minister, know that I will always be there supporting you 110%. My wife was on my core team and walked with me in loving these teens and bringing them closer to Christ. And although she was never really truly raised Catholic, her faith background was Methodist. And in being a Methodist, there's so much similarities that I see in Methodist faith and Catholicism. And we were able to kind of unify ourselves on those things that make us similar. And at the same time, she always wants to learn more. She has an openness in her heart. She has a desire to always seek truth. And that's what I love about her, is that she seeks truth. And together, we support each other. She actually comes to Mass with me. And she has to hold a missalette and follows along with me, because she doesn't obviously know some of the responses that we as Catholics know so well. But what it has taught me is a deeper appreciation for my Catholic faith. She challenges what I believe, right? And in doing so, it allows me to seek further the answers to her question. It's only making me a better Catholic to have to really truly study why I believe what I believe, and not just what I believe. And that's helping me as a youth minister, because I find that I can relate to a teen who might be struggling with their Catholic faith right now, that might have hangups on certain beliefs. And I'm able to articulate the same way that I would articulate to my wife, which is out of love. Just truly, let's be seekers of truth. And that's kind of for me what it's been like being married to a non-Catholic. But I truly am blessed that she is so supportive of everything that I do.
She's a great person. The little I've had a chance to interact with her and just hear you talk about her, she's very lucky to have you, and you're very lucky to have her. And being an apologist who has to defend and explain the faith, it always makes me fired up when I hear a youth minister or somebody who does evangelization work want to be able to defend and explain the faith to anyone out of love, because you really just want to bring them to Christ and to the church he established. So I commend you for that. This podcast is about suffering. So what element does your understanding of suffering play in the program you run and the lives of the young adults you impact at your parish?
So I find that as a youth minister, I've really learned the art of listening. I now have a desire to really hear the young people that I work with, sharing their hearts, knowing that as someone who has been all things unholy, as I said before, I really struggled in high school. I really struggled with fitting in. I desired so badly to just be noticed, to be seen. And I think that any young person that hears this can relate to that one statement. We just want to be seen. We want to be heard. We want to be loved. We want to be liked even. And we hate having enemies. And to me, that's what spiritual progression is all about. You know, I think of the times that we're living right now where there's so much violence and division. My prayer is that I can somehow bring the unity of Jesus to the forefront of all of youth ministry, to unify our hearts under the banner of the resurrection of Jesus.
Oh, I definitely think you're already in so many ways in your ministry doing that. I mean, I was able to attend recently a little conference you had at your church with just a few teenagers discussing some of the things that are happening right now with the death of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement and Antifa movement and all the stuff that's happening in our country. And I just kind of wanted to show up and wanted to hear what they had to say. And even though it was a small group and it was just a few kids there, I was able to gather a good feeling about what their perception of this is. And you face a big challenge, but I think if God has equipped anybody to do that, Kyle, he's certainly equipped you to be able to do it. And I know I want to close with like this really big announcement that I think is really exciting. I didn't include it in the introduction, and I wanted to let you talk. You know, I always talk about how does this suffering in your life turn into like the greatest thing that's ever happened to you. So all these experiences I'm thinking about, you just got some really awesome news yesterday, if I'm not mistaken. You're going to be a representative for Life Teen International throughout the Diocese of Lafayette to help all these youth ministers in our diocese. There's 121 parishes. Not all of them are gifted with finances to be able to have a full-time youth minister. Some of them have volunteer youth ministers. Some of them have parents that are helping. And you're going to be able to mingle and build relationships with all these people and pour out all this experience you have. And I know this was a big moment for you. So maybe talk about how, despite all the stuff you've been through, maybe all that was a preparation for this moment in your life and how that's going to tie into what you do with Life Teen.
I think it certainly will tie into everything. You know, as I said before, we never lose who we are as young people. You know, God changes our name. God gives us a purpose and a plan. But we never, you know, our wounds always, to some degree, will always follow us. You always have scars, right? Scars are things that, you know, stay behind when you get cut, or maybe you have a bad football injury. Like I played high school football, and, you know, my knees to this day still stink, you know, when I run. So your wounds never really leave you until we are into our resurrected bodies, which hopefully, again, that'll happen for everyone. But for me, I guess I've now realized that God is giving me a mission and a plan. And that mission and plan is to hopefully unify the body of Christ as believers, to know that we're not in this alone, that we're all fighting the same battles. We're all trying to win souls for Jesus. And so for me, to have this honor being bestowed upon me to become an area contact was really awesome. I had been really just trying to be myself. And in being myself, and as you said at the beginning of this podcast, my desire is always to love the person I am in contact with across from me, whoever that person is. I'm called to love them as a brother and sister in Christ, to hopefully empower them to, maybe if they're not living a virtuous life, to maybe hopefully bring them to that life, to disciple them, to walk with them in a journey, knowing that they're not walking alone. And so to hear another youth minister share with me that they were proud of me and the work that I had been doing, for me was the biggest compliment that I could ever receive. To truly know that in youth ministry, you don't always see your fruits. You don't always see the good work that you're doing. But to be affirmed and to know that you're on the right path is a profound experience for me and for, I'm sure, many others who might be listening.
Absolutely. And I want you to know that as somebody who is deeply ingrained in personal prayer, especially the rosary every day, know that moving forward, I will not only be praying for you, but for every youth minister in the diocese each day on those beads, asking the Blessed Mother to be with you guys and to, I think she's the best catechist. She's just the perfect disciple, and to help lead you guys, to lead other people to Jesus. I really want to thank you for being on the show today. I want to thank you for your humility and your vulnerability and sharing your suffering, and most importantly, how you've allowed Christ to work in that suffering in your life, not only for your own benefit, but now solely for the benefit of other people. And look, if you're in need of an aid with the Life Team program and you just want to get your teenager involved in a great youth program, get in touch with Kyle Melancon and go to the Holy Cross website and find his contact information there and reach out to him. I know I've sent him emails and had people contact him, and he's very open to hearing those things. It's a great story that you shared. So if you enjoyed it as a listener, share the podcast, give it a rating, leave a comment, and if you'd like to invite me to speak at an event or pick up a copy of my books, shoot me a message on social media or go to my website at chadjudice.com. Remember, all proceeds from my writing and speaking go to fund my son Eli's lifelong medical expenses. Remember, guys, we must boast most gladly in our weaknesses, so that the strength of Christ might be with us. When we're weak, that's when we're really strong. And it always takes a Good Friday to leave behind who the world says we should be, in order to rise with Jesus Christ on Easter Sunday and become the person he created us to be, a saint. Until next time, God love you.
In a world that says give up, I did not yield. I gave my all for your battlefield.